I remember the first time my name was read aloud by the system, a sound bent out of shape like it was never mine. My chest froze as if my identity had been shaved down to fit its indifferent mold. I wanted to protest, but silence felt safer. Years later, every wrong syllable piled into me like stones in a pocket, heavy enough to drown who I thought I was. Emma said, "Maybe it's just a mistake, don't take it personally." But I did. David said, "They don't mean harm, it's a machine." But harm doesn't wait for intent. Claire said, "It's just a name." But a name is the first truth we own. Each misfire from the system was not neutral. It taught me to shrink, to soften my voice so I wouldn't disturb the room. I thought if I carried the burden quietly, I'd be spared rejection. Instead, I became my own eraser. My mouth rehearsed silence until it learned fluency. My heart carried the wound as proof of belonging bought at the cost of being unseen. And tonight, I confess this bargain has expired. I carried that silence home with me, pressing it into the walls of my room. My mirror became the only witness to the fragments of me that still resisted. Michael said, "If the system can't learn me, maybe I don't deserve to be known." Emma texted, "You're overthinking." But I wasn't. I was unraveling. David said, "Names are labels, not prisons." Yet I felt locked behind bars built by indifference. Claire reminded me it's not life or death. But to me, it was death by repetition, each syllable stripped until I could barely hear myself. I whispered my name into the dark, testing its weight, afraid of how thin it sounded after years of neglect. Each whisper felt like proof of a crime no one else saw. My name was supposed to anchor me, but in silence it became a ghost, rattling at the edges of my existence. I began to believe I was safer erased. Every morning I put on the mask of efficiency, the good worker, the agreeable friend. Emma said, "You're always so dependable." David said, "You never complain." Claire said, "You're the calm one." They didn't see the storm in me. I was shrinking into routines that drained me of pulse. Smiling when my name was bent, nodding when apologies came, staying quiet when correction burned in my throat. My mask became my survival, but it was no life. A mask is not skin, yet it begins to suffocate like one. The silence fractured once when Emma mispronounced my name, deliberately in jest. Laughter rippled across the table, and I smiled like it was nothing. Michael said, "It's fine, I'm used to it." But inside I burned. David laughed too, but softer, as if guilt seeped behind the smile. Claire raised her brow but said nothing. The joke passed, but I carried its echo for days. My mask slipped that night, and in the mirror, I admitted I had become complicit. Each false smile was another contract signed against myself. That night, I couldn't sleep. My name circled in my head like a ghost refusing burial. I realized the silence was no shield, it was surrender. Michael said, "If I keep letting this happen, I am the one erasing myself." Thought terrified me, but it was true. Emma's laughter, David's nervousness, Claire's silence, they had all become part of my mask. But the mask cracked, and through the crack, I glimpsed something raw and unedited. The system had mispronounced me for years, but I had mispronounced myself longer by staying quiet. That was the first night I decided I had to speak louder. I traced the wound back to the first day of school when my teacher paused, squinted at the roll sheet, and twisted my name into something unrecognizable. Michael said, "That's not me." But she smiled politely, "Close enough." The room laughed, and I laughed too, small and shaky, because belonging cost less than correction. That lie became my survival rule. Stay quiet, stay agreeable, don't make them uncomfortable. Emma once said, "You're easygoing." David said, "You always adapt." Claire said, "You never cause trouble." They meant it as praise, but I knew it was camouflage. Each compliment was a reminder that my silence was working. The mask grew from that wound. The helper, the reliable, the one who didn't ask for more. My want was simple: approval, warmth, a place to rest without question. But the need was sharper. Integrity, my voice unbent, my name unbroken. I kept the mask on so long I forgot its edges, until nights when my reflection stared back accusingly. The lie had worked, but it had buried me alive. The mask grew heavy and rituals, I thought, kept me safe. Every morning, I repeated the same small rule. Smile. Nod. Don't correct. Don't draw heat. It felt like armor, but it was a cage. Emma once said, "You always make everyone comfortable." David added, "You're the balance in the room." Claire said, "You smooth things over." These words felt like chains dressed as kindness. My ritual was silence at meetings, acceptance at gatherings, shrinking in every room where my name bent into something foreign. At home, I whispered my real name before sleep, as if reminding myself I still existed beneath the edits. But even there, my younger self whispered louder, demanding I stop abandoning him. The ritual wasn't working anymore. The mask cracked each time someone looked through me, and the rules I'd lived by trembled like fragile glass. Emma noticed before I did. One afternoon she said, "You don't look like yourself." I forced a smile and said, "I'm fine." But she frowned, the mask slipping in her eyes. David later said, "You've been distant." Claire added, "You seem distracted." The truth was, silence had stopped protecting me. Every word swallowed turned bitter. Every mispronunciation felt louder. My private rule, stay agreeable, no longer kept peace. Instead, it betrayed me. I wanted to scream, but my body stayed quiet, locked in the old contract. That night my reflection didn't smile back. It asked, "Who are you if not this mask?" And I didn't have an answer. The wound was louder than my disguise. The silence failed publicly one day. In a crowded meeting, the system mispronounced my name again, and I froze. Emma's glance carried pity. David's face tightened. Claire whispered my name correctly under her breath. My rule had cracked. People noticed the fracture. The room didn't collapse, but I did inside. Michael said to himself, "I'm disappearing." For the first time I realized my mask had betrayed me in front of everyone. That night, I admitted to myself, the ritual of silence had never been safety. It had been self-burial, and the coffin was made of smiles and nods I'd rehearsed for years. The mask wasn't working anymore, and the cost was showing in the cracks of my relationships. That evening, I broke the ritual. I stood in my bedroom and said my full name aloud, each syllable trembling but whole. Michael said, "This is mine." The sound echoed awkwardly, but it was real. Emma's text pinged, "Are you okay?" David sent, "Don't overthink." Claire wrote, "They'll get it right next time." None of their words mattered. The rule had failed. I couldn't go back to pretending. The younger version of me, the boy silenced in class, felt closer, more insistent. My mask was breaking, and for once I wasn't afraid. The lie had carried me, but it had also erased me. Tonight, for the first time, I chose not to renew that contract. The silence no longer shielded me, instead it exposed me. Each day at work, the system announced my name wrong, and every ear in the room pretended it was correct. Michael thought, if I correct them, I break the script. Emma said, "Don't dwell, keep moving." David said, "It's just how things are." Claire muttered, "You let them do it." Their voices tangled with my own doubts. My body stiffened each time the letters came out bent, as though I had been erased in plain sight. Each choice closed a door. Speak and risk isolation, or stay silent and vanish further. The office was no longer neutral. It became a stage where I performed my own erasure. The wound whispered louder than my mask, reminding me I was complicit. The pressure grew with every repetition, a weight pressing down until breathing felt like betrayal. What I once thought survival now felt like slow disappearance. One afternoon I tried to correct the voice assistant on the system, but the machine stuttered and repeated the same mistake. Michael said softly, "That's not right." Emma chuckled nervously, "It doesn't matter." David whispered, "Don't waste time." Claire looked at me, waiting, as if daring me to insist. My throat closed. The sound lodged like a stone. I wanted to shout, but only exhaled defeat. That moment carved a crack through my rule. If my name could be bent without consequence, then who else would I allow to define me? The silence was no longer protective. It was a cage that I kept reinforcing myself. Every failure to speak made the bars thicker, heavier, and harder to break. The choice shrank until it was unbearable. Erase myself daily or risk being seen. At home, I opened an old box of documents. My childhood certificates bore the same misprinted version of my name. Michael whispered, "Even here." Emma's voice replayed in memory, "It's just a detail." David once said, "Paper doesn't define you." Claire had said, "But you never corrected them." The paper stared back indifferent, its ink permanent, its truth distorted. I felt betrayed not only by the system, but by my own history, as though even the record had been trained to forget me. Each page was a mirror of silence I had signed over the years. My younger self screamed inside, demanding to be remembered, demanding not to be erased again. I realized then that every document, every form, every certificate had built a cage of authority around my silence, and I had never broken it. The pressure followed me into family dinner. My mother addressed me with the mispronounced version, unaware of its weight. Michael said, "That's not my name, but only in his head." Emma later said, "Families don't mean harm." David reminded, "They raised you, let it go." Claire pressed, "If you don't correct them, who will?" The food tasted like ash. Words lodged in my chest like knives. Silence felt like betrayal of both past and present. I wanted to scream my real name across the table, but fear of rupture glued my tongue. I saw my reflection in the silverware, distorted, smaller than the boy I had been. My body remembered the rule, "Don't disturb the order." But my heart screamed, "This is not who I am anymore." The motifs kept appearing, haunting me. A key from childhood with my initials misengraved. A letter from college where my name was shortened without asking. A workplace badge spelling me wrong. Each artifact was a cage disguised as belonging. Michael said, "Why did I accept this all these years?" Emma said, "Because it was easier." David said, "Because you wanted peace." Claire said, "But peace has cost you yourself." The evidence stacked higher until denial was impossible. Someone benefited from my silence. The system that saved effort, the people who avoided discomfort, the stories that painted me compliant. But I was the one who paid. The floor tilted beneath me, and I realized my silence was never neutral. It had always been a contract signed in my blood. The twist came when I realized the story I had lived wasn't just written by others. I had authored my own disappearance. Michael thought, "I trained them to misname me by staying silent." Emma said, "But you were protecting yourself." David said, "You just wanted peace." Claire said, "Or maybe you wanted approval more than truth." That struck like lightning. I saw every laugh I forced, every nod I gave, every contract of silence I signed. The mispronunciations weren't accidents, they were agreements I allowed to stand. The system hadn't stolen my identity alone. I had given it away, one small surrender at a time. My chest shook, because the betrayal wasn't just external. It was me. My silence had been survival, but also consent. And that truth burned more than any mistake of theirs. I revisited moments I once thought were kindness. Teachers calling me close versions of my name with smiles. Friends jokingly bending syllables to fit their tongues. Emma once said, "We meant no harm." David said, "It was playful." Claire said, "You laughed with us." But now I heard those words differently. What once felt like affection was control disguised as acceptance. Each smile was a contract. Keep them comfortable and abandon yourself. The truth stung deeper because I had helped write it. The laughter that once warned me now echoed hollow, a reminder of how easy it was for me to let go of myself. The memories shifted color, bright tones turning gray, each one relit by truth instead of illusion. And the betrayal grew sharper. The body's memory betrayed me. Each time someone bent my name, my chest tightened, my breath shortened, my stomach twisted. Michael whispered, "This is not normal." Emma once said, "You're too sensitive." David reminded, "It's just habit." Claire said, "Or it's erasure." The realization crashed. The flaw they marked in me was not weakness but persistence. My body had always been the one to resist, even when my mouth stayed shut. The tension was not sickness, it was truth knocking. What I thought was my flaw was proof of strength, the refusal to adapt to being a rest. The twist was not outside but inside. My wound was a compass, not a cage. And I had ignored it for too long. The documents I found weren't neutral either. The letter from college carried a false name, signed with authority. The workplace ID badge spelled me wrong, worn daily as proof of compliance. Michael thought I wore lies against my chest. Emma said, "But you needed it for access." David said, "It got you through the doors." Claire said, "And it locked you inside." The twist was clear. I wasn't powerless. I was complicit. Every artifact wasn't only an insult, it was a collaboration with my silence. I had carried these tokens as if they belonged to me, when they were monuments of surrender. That truth broke something open. If I had authored my own erasure, I could also write my return. The twist forced a decision. Help existed where I had refused to look. Emma said, "If you ask, I'll stand with you." David said, "I don't want to lose comfort." Claire said, "Then decide, silence or truth." The person I feared resembling, the younger self inside me, was not weakness but the loudest witness. His demand was simple: choose me now or abandon me forever. Michael thought, I can't erase him again. The question shifted, not, what happened to me? But, who am I if I accept this? The silence that once seemed safe now looked like betrayal. The mask that felt protective now burned like ash. My heart pounded, but the verdict was undeniable. The myth was broken. The truth demanded entry. The choice came at work when the system mispronounced me again, and the room went still. My chest tightened, but this time I did not swallow it. Michael said, "That is not my name." The words felt heavy, shaking in the air. Emma looked stunned but hopeful. David shifted uneasily, whispering, "Let it go." Claire smirked and said, "Finally." My voice quivered, but the boundary was drawn. I saw the mask sliding off like old skin. The risk was immediate. Approval could vanish, harmony could shatter, but I couldn't retreat. The silence had cost me too much. I felt the weight of the decision anchor me, as though I had stepped fully into myself for the first time. The bargain was broken, and the room could never return to its old script. Integrity demanded this price. The silence that followed was sharper than words. My manager cleared her throat and moved on, but the shift had already occurred. Michael thought, I will not shrink again. Emma leaned close and whispered, I'm proud of you. David frowned. You didn't need to make it awkward. Claire chuckled. Sometimes awkward is the point. The decision cost me something visible, the ease of invisibility. The room looked at me differently now, no longer the one who blended in. My mask lay broken on the floor, and in its place was a name pronounced correctly, even if reluctantly. The tension in my chest loosened, replaced by something unfamiliar, freedom with edges sharp enough to cut. I knew then the choice had locked a door behind me. There was no going back. Later that day, Emma found me at my desk. Emma said, You sounded like yourself for the first time. Michael smiled faintly. It felt terrifying. David walked by muttering, It's just a name. Claire said, And yet it's everything. Their words carved reality into shape. What had been dismissed as trivial had become sacred. My voice no longer trembled because the truth was simple. Names carry blood, history, and promise. I had paid the price of erasure too long. Choosing differently meant risking comfort, but reclaiming dignity. Michael whispered, "This is the self I can live with." The old contract lay in ashes, and I did not mourn it. Integrity had asked for everything, and I had given it. That evening, I stood before my mirror again. The younger version of me stared back from memory, waiting. Michael said, "I will not erase you again." His eyes widened, softening with trust. Emma's voice lingered in my ear, "Be proud." David's echoed, "Don't make it harder than it is." Claire's cut sharper, "Hard is where truth lives." For the first time I looked at my reflection and saw no mask, only the man who had chosen his own name. The cost was visible: ease, harmony, invisibility. But the gain was louder: freedom, dignity, and a voice finally heard. My breath came steady, and the silence inside me shifted, not empty now but spacious. The decision had been made, and there was no reversing it. The next day, when the system spoke my name wrong again, I corrected it clearly, without hesitation. Michael said, "That is not me. This is my name." Emma smiled, "There you are." David sighed, "You're making things complicated." Claire said, "No, he's making them true." The room shifted again, but this time I did not shake. The mask was gone, the contract broken, the silence ended. What I lost was comfort. What I gained was myself. I walked out knowing the choice had closed the past behind me forever. There was no going back to being small. I had spoken louder, and the sound had changed me. The dust began to settle. At work, people hesitated before speaking my name, but at least they paused to ask. Michael thought, "This is what it means to be seen." Emma said, "It's strange, but it feels right." David muttered, "It slows things down." Claire said, "Slowing down is better than erasure." The air felt lighter, though not entirely comfortable. Some avoided my gaze, others leaned into correction. Each syllable was sharper, closer, truer. My new ordinary was not easy, but it was honest. The rituals I once used to shrink were gone. I no longer whispered my name into the dark. I said it aloud at every introduction. It felt raw at first, but with each repetition it grew natural. I had fewer masks now, fewer rooms where I hid, and for the first time in years, my silence did not rule me. At home, the mirror no longer reflected someone half vanished. Michael said softly, "This is me." His reflection was whole, not fractured. Emma had once reminded, "Be proud." David's voice echoed, "Don't overcomplicate." Claire's memory insisted, "Hard is where you grow." I retired the ritual of whispering into the dark, because I no longer needed proof of existence. My voice lived outside now, unedited. The younger version of me lingered less in shadows. His demand had been met, his presence calmer, quieter, not gone but no longer screaming. I realized that reconciliation didn't mean forgetting him. It meant living the promise I had broken so many times. The mask was gone, and in its place was an ordinary face I could finally recognize. Family dinners became different too. When my mother used the wrong name again, I gently corrected her. Michael said, "That's not me, say it right." Silence filled the table, thick and uneasy. Emma smiled faintly, breaking tension with warmth. David whispered, "Why stir things?" Claire said, "Because he has to." My mother's lips shaped the correct version slowly, uncertain, but it landed true. My chest loosened. It wasn't reconciliation, not fully, but it was an opening. Some bridges would never be as before, but the boundaries stood. This was not defiance, it was truth finally given space. And it was enough to breathe without guilt. Workplaces shifted slowly. Some colleagues stumbled, but others corrected themselves with effort. Michael thought, "This is the rhythm of change." Emma said, "They're learning." David complained, "It takes too much energy." Claire replied, "Energy well spent." Each correction was a small victory, a note that bent the old system into something closer to truth. My name was no longer a ghost trailing me, it was part of the room, demanding presence. The paper walls of old systems still held my misprinted history, but my voice was strong enough to contradict them. My chest no longer collapsed each time I walked in, it expanded instead. The rituals that once suffocated me were replaced with new habits: steady breathing, clear speech, boundaries held without apology. I walked through the city one evening, hearing my name in my own voice, no longer bent or erased. Michael said, "This is my inheritance, and I claim it." Emma's words echoed, "Be proud." David's voice lingered, "Why make it difficult?" Claire's rang louder, "Because it matters." Bridges had burned. Some people stepped back, unable to adjust. But new paths opened too, people meeting me as I truly was. The shame I once carried turned into clarity. The silence that felt like safety now looked like absence. And the absence no longer owned me. My name was whole, my voice steady, and my life smaller but truer. The fear I once thought I couldn't survive had become the soil of my freedom. What I once whispered in the dark now lived in daylight. The city felt different now, not because it had changed but because I had. Michael thought, "Every step I take carries the weight of my real name." Emma said, "You sound lighter these days." David muttered, "You're harder to be around." Claire answered, "That's called being alive." My voice no longer stumbled in introductions. Each syllable echoed like a small rebellion stitched into the air. The silence that had once consumed me was replaced by stillness I could finally inhabit. It wasn't victory, it was survival earned through fire. The people who once misnamed me still tried, sometimes with hesitation, sometimes with resistance, but the difference now was my refusal to bend. The circle had closed. What began as a wound became a vow. And the vow was mine to keep. At the office, the system still faltered at my name. But this time I interrupted without hesitation. Michael said, "Say it again." Emma looked proud, whispering, "That's courage." David frowned, "You're making it difficult." Claire said, "Difficult is necessary." The room shifted like tectonic plates, the air denser, the silence thicker. Yet my heart no longer shrank. Correction was no longer a battle. It was habit. My colleagues adjusted, some faster than others, but the shift was permanent. My name existed here now, no longer a ghost, no longer erased. Each correction was not defiance, it was belonging on my own terms. The past bargain had dissolved, leaving only the truth. Family dinners no longer carried the same fear. When my mother slipped, I corrected her calmly. Michael said, "That is not me." Emma added softly, "You've taught us too." David grumbled, "You're stubborn." Claire said, "He's finally himself." The table felt different, not entirely safe, not entirely warm, but undeniably real. Some distances remained, some warmth pulled away, but I accepted that truth. Reconciliation was conditional, not a surrender. I no longer begged for belonging at the price of myself. I gave them the choice to meet me or lose me, and that was freedom. My voice no longer trembled. It rang steady. The silence that once killed me now bowed to me. Walking home one night, I realized the fear that once ruled me had lost its grip. Michael thought, "I don't audition for my own life anymore." Emma's words echoed, "Be proud." David's lingered, "You complicate everything." Claire's rang louder, "No, you clarified it." The streets glowed with neon reflections, but I no longer blended into their blur. I stood out, not because I sought attention, but because I no longer erased myself. Each breath tasted freer, sharper, and earned. The silence I once carried had become space, not absence. My name no longer felt heavy. It felt inevitable, like it had always belonged here. The final blow was quiet, one sentence I carried into the world like a vow. Michael said, "I will not audition for my own life." Emma whispered, "Then, live it." David shook his head, "You've changed too much." Claire said, "No, he's only now arrived." The words were not flourish, not spectacle. They were truth carved by years of silence, and the cost of finally breaking it. The circle closed where it began, in the confession that a name bent wrong had once broken me. Now the same name, spoken right, rebuilt me. The silence that followed was not absence but peace. My decision was final, chosen, and alive.